Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted. I'm Dan Tilson, your host, and over there we have...
I'm John.
Hey, man, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
My co-host.
Thank you.
You know, I really appreciate the outpour. I don't know if that's the right word because it wasn't like we got hundreds of emails. We got maybe a dozen.
But really good heartfelt messages of people really appreciating your ministry here, Dan. Like you're reaching out a lot of people, and those comments and emails you're getting that we both get to see have been absolutely moving and touching.
Yeah, equally your ministry too. I mean, we are doing this together, and
I'm co-host,
very Franciscan
executive
of you.
Producer, something like that.
Yeah, the talent.
That's
what your bio says on the website. But no, last week was a very personal episode for me, telling a little bit of my story. And as I reminded those around me that it's, you know, I get pulled into the trap of, okay, how many likes did we get this week? How many views did we get? But it's not about the views. It's about the quality of whether or not someone feels inspired to make a change in their life, or perhaps to be more honest about what they're feeling and start to unpack that. And, you know, I got some really, really touching messages. So I just want to thank everyone that feels inspired by this, and just know that if you have your own reflections that you want to send, I am definitely ready to receive them and read through, and it means a lot. Your stories help make the church more holy. So that's that. Earlier today, I looked at an artifact from Poland that somebody gave me the other year, and I was thinking about it because probably going to talk about JP2 once or twice during this episode. But it was a rosary made out of salt from the mines in Poland. And do you have any idea what gives away that I have not used this salt rosary even once to pray?
Probably still intact, and salt hasn't gone away, or what? I don't know.
Literally perfect cubes, 50 perfect cubes.
There you go.
The rosary doesn't even really, it wouldn't really swing because it's just so perfectly cut. But yeah, it really gives away that I've never used it.
You said the salt rosary?
It's made out of salt from Poland. Yeah.
You know, I've heard of marbles, rocks, stones, precious gems. Never heard salt.
Salt and bread. Those are the two things that Poland has a lot of, other than Catholics.
I was going to say pierogies, but...
Pierogies.
Yeah. Pierogies are great.
The sodium content in pierogies.
Through the roof.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they can make rosaries out of it.
So shifting gears a little bit, on Sunday, we had a middle schooler show up to my parish, and he found the priest after Mass. He sat through the 9 a.m. and then he asked the priest after Mass, what is it like to be Catholic? He told us, I'm not totally sure what brought him here. Obviously, he had seen some TikTok influencers that were Catholic and converts, and he wanted to check it out. He had said that his mom actually doesn't like Catholics at all. So I asked him, I said, does she know that you're here? And he said, no, she knows that I'm at church. I said, okay, all right, we'll accept that. You are at church. But the priest sat him down and said, okay, shoot, what are your questions? Tell me, what do you want to know about our religion? And, you know, it took a lot of courage for this 13, 14-year-old boy to walk into a place where he knows literally no one. But something about the approach of just sitting there and almost like grilling him, interviewing him, what is it that you want to know? He had no idea where to start. And so I said to the priest, I said, Father, why don't you go upstairs and get ready for your next Mass? And I will show him in the sanctuary in the main church where the display case is for all of the relics of the saints that we have. I figured there's probably nothing more exciting in this church to a 13-year-old who has no idea what he just experienced at the Mass other than the bones of saints. So later, as I was driving home, I was reflecting, that was weird. This kid has no idea what kind of club or cult or faith he was walking into. And I was like, do you want to see some bones?
you want to see parts of dead bodies? Yeah. It's weird.
So obviously, it's very meaningful to have so many relics at our parish. We're very lucky. We have it for historic reasons because our parish is the Italian language parish, and it's, it was founded by some Vatican officials. So we're lucky. And I thought it was fun to show him that, and he got to open up a little bit more about his story as we were pointing out. That's the arm bone of St. Anthony of Padua. Here's a statue of him, and that's what he looked like when he was alive. But I'm curious, from a convert's perspective, John, what do you think of relics?
I have such a mixed relationship with relics. So like the historical nerd in me, I find them absolutely fascinating.
Sure.
Right? Like my time with the Franciscans, like my Tau cross I still wear on special occasions.
What's
now.
a Tau cross for the listeners?
Tau cross is the cross that St. Francis essentially fell in love with and made a part of the Franciscan order when it became a religious group. So think of it like a capitalized T, if you will.
Right.
Is what it looks like. And not to go too much into it, but there is a lot of historical evidence that the cross that Christ was crucified on actually looked like a capitalized T instead of the lowercase t that we traditionally see on the inside of your churches and on crucifix necklaces. But the whole thing with relics, though, so like my Tau cross is a third class relic. It's touched, the habit of St. Francis. It's touched the hair of Maximilian Kolbe. A lot of the Franciscan saints that obviously I have, like...
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah, go for it.
Padre Pio, Franciscan, right?
Yes.
Okay, we have...
Padre Pio was Capuchin.
So a different flavor of Franciscan that you don't... Okay, sure. We have what I believe is not a sanctioned or acceptable relic of him on display in our parish. It is a handkerchief. Like a facial tissue for his nose.
That is better than most. So the whole thing with Maximilian Kolbe, obviously, if you know the story of him, he was sent to a concentration camp during the Holocaust for standing up for his Jewish brothers and sisters. And he eventually died there. He took the place of someone who was supposed to go into one of the chambers, and he died. Well, the friars at his friary realized he was something special. So the friars are known in Europe to essentially have their own barbers, right? They have a brother trained in the art of haircut.
Okay.
They started saving like his beard trimmings, his hair trimmings, because they had a feeling that he was going to be like canonized one day, which, it is a little weird. Anthony of Padua, you mentioned this, right? At the Franciscan friary in Ellicott City, Maryland, they have a piece of his tongue.
Oh.
Which is a little wild to think that the tongue... Anywho. But yeah, so I love relics as an faith aid. And I think it's great that we can physically see a part of someone that we know existed. And I think for a lot of people that need to quote, see it to believe it, I think relics are great for that. But the other part of me is like, that's a part of like a dead person. And it just looks weird having a bunch of bones on display.
I am trying my hardest not to laugh too hard right now so that the mic doesn't clip.
You're good.
But I can only imagine that this ministry like takes off one day and then like somebody starts coming to cut pieces of our clothes off while we're wearing them. And that will be my signal that they are about to sacrifice us.
What was it? You told me back in the olden days of the church, the quickest way to become a saint was what? Martyrdom. There we go.
I'm glad you remembered that.
I did.
I love the things that stick, and they're usually not the things that I think you're going to use in your daily life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've used the bow and arrow and the target reference a couple times in my big boy job.
Okay.
But yes. Yeah. There you go.
Well, also one more note on this before we dive deeper. My brother brought this up recently. My brother, also a little bit of a liturgia geek. He said, hey, have you ever thought about how functionally, not theologically, but functionally, the idea of scattering ashes, after a loved one has passed, they've been cremated, and scattering ashes, the church disapproves of that, right?
Correct.
Okay. But we take the bones of these saints and sometimes their tongues
and scatter them.
Yeah. And yes, I completely understand and respect that intention and purpose do have theological meaning that makes it different. I am more convinced that once upon a time, there was probably something happening to the bodies of Christians, probably very early on. And they probably did not like the idea of cremation and scattering ashes. Obviously, we show respect for the body. We want to show that we understand theologically the resurrection of the dead that we expect to come. And so therefore our burial practices should reflect that. However, totally exactly the same thing if you think about it. Scattering ashes and sending relics around the world. So
I mean, essentially you're just speeding up the process, right? Because eventually you return to dust, right? I mean, they say it every Ash Wednesday. So yeah, I mean, you're just essentially expediting the ash process, if you will.
We are, no disrespect, by the way, I've had family members who chose to be cremated and scattered. And I got to tell you, I am convinced that our God is big enough to figure out what to do with that.
And the ceremonies are usually done in a beautiful and respectful way also.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's yeah.
Now, personally, if you ask me, if you do that to me, I will come back and haunt you.
Oh, see, it's cremation, and don't bury me in the ground. I want a mausoleum above ground.
Mausoleum, okay.
I don't want to be in the idea of being 6 feet in the cold ground for whatever reason bothers me. Like, I'm not asking for a pyramid. I'm not a pharaoh, right? Like, I don't want to be like Cleopatra or Tutankhamun or anything like that. Like, I just want something simple above ground. That's all I'm asking for.
I'm going to remember this episode.
Please
in fact, in lieu of a eulogy one day, I'll be like, I'll refer to
play this.
Episode 7. So his final wishes. I wonder if this has any legal standing in court. If they're like, well, we have his recorded will and testament.
I mean, I don't think I have an active will or anything at the moment. So, I mean,
we are so far from theology right now.
Sorry about that, folks.
No. So, in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how the church has changed over the centuries. I've never totally understood why people say that the church is exactly the same everywhere and always, because nothing about Catholic history demonstrates that. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, we are exactly the same everywhere and always in the eternal sense, but in the living tradition sense, it's very much like, according to professor and priest Tomáš Halík, is very much like a winding river. Obviously, over time, the water changes the contours and the shape, and he says that you never really step on the same stone twice. So, going back to relics, I was on a trip to Rome with my parents in December, and I really wanted to take them to see the catacombs. Have you ever been to a catacomb before?
Not in Rome. I believe I went to some of the catacombs beneath some churches in Germany.
What was it like?
Was
it Catholic, by the way?
It was.
Okay.
It was musky.
Okay.
No, it was cool. Obviously, some of the the churches don't have the bodies down there anymore. A lot of them have kind of like put them in different areas, but like it was really kind of cool to see how people that were buried in the church were kind of like honored for their positions in the church and what they've done with the church in the catacombs, and kind of like being one with the church. It kind of brings the whole community aspect back to it. You go to mass at the church, you're there as a community, and you're there with the angels and saints praising our Lord, and then like those who have passed on, who are now hopefully with our God in heaven, are there physically in the catacombs as well. So it's kind of cool.
For sure. Do you know what century it was from? Was it really early or it came a little bit later?
So this one was in Bamberg, Germany. So the cathedral there was finished in 1026 AD.
Okay.
So pretty early in the Roman Catholic.
Fair.
Holy Roman Empire, that's what I'm going for.
Fair. Totally fair. So one of the reasons why I wanted to take my parents to see the catacombs is because I wanted them to understand from all of the what is effectively cave art drawn on the walls of the catacomb. I wanted them to see that struggle that the first Christians had in describing their faith and describing the church, because the symbols that you'll see on the walls are very rarely used in churches today. You had mentioned the Tau cross, which was like a T, an uppercase T instead of a lowercase T. Probably not a symbol that was used at the time. In fact, one thing that was notably absent was the crucifix or the cross. Mm-hmm. Did you know that the early Christians didn't use that to represent their belief or their faith?
Yeah, they used other symbols. I believe the Bible even talks about the fish as one of the main ones that now you can see plastered on the back of vehicles driving around on the road.
And occasionally you get the one with feet and it says like Darwin on it.
Yeah, I think I applaud them for that because I think that's a clever twist on it.
It's cute. Well, there's also the anchor, the dove. There's a woman with her hands extended in prayer is one that we saw very commonly. That's, by the way, these are the catacombs of San Priscilla or Saint Priscilla, and they are in Rome, and I believe it's from the 3rd century. So a couple things that were really cool in there. One was the symbols that were used. I wanted my parents to, like I said, see that struggle where Christians were trying to figure out, okay, we want to create a new genre of art called Christian, and we have no idea what that's supposed to look like. And so in many ways, they're borrowing symbols from the pagans, from other Romans, from things that they've seen around their town, but they're not using the crucifix. What was cool is at the catacomb of St. Priscilla in Rome, they have what is believed to be the first ever cave painting depiction of Mary with the child Jesus. And it happens to be above we believe it to be a martyr's tomb. The way we know that is because the floor drops 20 feet.
Oh.
And of course, the one at the very top is going to be the one that was dug first. But clearly, a lot of Christians said, no, I need to be buried there, next to that person. Probably wasn't a wealthy person considering the small size of the enclosed area where they were. But they were probably a saint or a martyr because the people clearly insisted on being buried next to the bones of that person. So relics have actually taken very significant place in Catholic culture since the very, very beginning. But what I wanted my parents to see was that the art has changed. And if the art has changed, the churches have changed. If the churches have changed, the structures have changed. Not a whole lot. Not so dramatic as the functions we were just talking about, but it looks different. It looks different century after century. And so what we're talking about today is how the church changes, not in the eternal sense, but how the church changes so that it responds to what is going on in the world. I don't know if you heard, there was a story in the news this past week. We're not going to say the name of the accounts, but there is a Catholic apologist who was accused of, I'm not sure if it was a crime, but certainly indecent behavior against a minor. And this was certainly a scandal online because this person had a rather significant following. And this is something that really shook his followers online. And we've talked about this before. Not only are we dealing with the abuse crisis in the church, and we're not saying this individual is guilty or even abused anybody, but I am saying that there is a crisis of faith in the church institution and in our leaders that are running the parishes because there have been so many deep problems associated with power and with status in the church that have finally come to light. And now we have to reevaluate the way that we come to rely on our clergy and even our fellow parishioners. And this is something that the church is grappling with. But what I think most people don't realize is that the church has been through scandals so many times in the past. And like a winding river, we always find a way through it. So for me, I think that the path forward for Catholicism is to understand our roles not as imposing dictators, not as people who follow rules, but people who accompany. So, John, I'll ask you, as part of your conversion, did you have any particular hopes and dreams for the church and how you would experience church going forward in your Catholic life?
So I may have been one of the weird ones here, but I know one of the things I was looking for in my faith journey was more structure. The Protestant churches I grew up in were, and it's not really a knock on Protestant denominations or anything, but they were a little too laid back, a little too free spirited is the term I'm going to use with how they would worship God or how they would go about their services. And like, I get they're trying different things. They're trying to attract people to their flavor of Christianity. And I get that. But for someone like myself, grew up in a military family, I like a little bit more structure. I like a little bit more knowing what to expect. And that's kind of what the Catholic Church offered for me. And that was one of many reasons why I was looking forward to it. But one of the big things obviously was community. I wanted a church community that was actually a community that did actually do their best to live the way Jesus wanted us to, give back to the poor, work with the homeless, the needy. Those kind of ministries were something that really attracted me to the Catholic Church because, the Catholic Church makes a very big point in doing that, whether it's through like a Lenten appeal, whether it's through Catholic charities or through your local parish. A Catholic parish is always doing something to give back to the community. And that's something that I really, really cherish and focus on in my spirituality in my everyday life is I want to have that outward focus, not that inward focus. I want to worry about, the homeless population. I want to worry about, people getting enough food on their plates, like making sure, like working at the food pantry, volunteering my time with homeless people and transitional housing organizations that really help get families back off the streets from being homeless. So that's kind of the thing that really helped with me is structure and actually living the mission.
It's nice that you say that because a lot of the people that reach out to this particular ministry that we've encountered so far, as opposed to who may be going to other ministries for Catholics who feel unwanted, is we make a really strong effort to tie everything back to those core Christian values, those core Catholic values. We're not taking anything in the faith and punting it.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to understand what is the eternal truth that the church has taught and how does it apply to your specific concrete realities. So I think what you described for your hopes of the church were actually very, very balanced. In the 9th century, the church was getting really, really lax. Now, of course, there were no Protestant denominations per se of the time. Of course, nothing we would call Protestant. There were small groups of people that would splinter off, but nothing really substantial. It was a very unified church. And in Europe in particular, Europe was basically all of the church at that time.
It was all of the church.
Yeah.
You know that Holy Roman Empire kind of thing I alluded to?
Yeah.
That
okay.
thing.
Well, so the monks in Germany, I say that, but now I think it's France. It was France.
I mean, it could be Munich because you know what Munich is in German?
Tell me.
Monks.
Huh.
It's actually translated to monks.
I just learned something new.
Look at that.
Is their mascot for FC Byron? Are they friars?
No. Bernie the Bear is not a friar.
He sounds like a Capuchin.
The only friar mascot that I know of is the San Diego Padres of Major League Baseball, where he actually is a friar in a Franciscan habit with the 3 knots in his rope.
Wow.
Which is very accurate, but I really don't think they understand the vows that those represents, especially in Major League Baseball, because there is no such thing as poverty in baseball.
Well, poverty, but there's also obedience. And what's that third one that we all forget?
Chastity.
Okay. Well, okay. So back to the 9th century, I have decided, although I will fact check myself later, the Cluniac reforms are what I'm talking about. Pretty darn confident that was France. But there was a movement amongst the monks, and they were trying to say, hey, we've got to live a more rigid, structured life. And they obviously meant it in the best of ways. And then over time, those monks took greater responsibility and leadership roles in the church. And then things started to spread from there. And part of it was a response to just how weak the papacy was in the century before. I mean, we've had a number of scandals with popes. Not every pope has been good. Many have been saints. Many are really quite inspiring figures. But it hasn't always been that way. And of course, bad behavior weakens the papacy. And so these monks were trying to say, well, if we had just been more disciplined, we wouldn't have this problem. The unfortunate thing is that the pendulum swings. Sometimes it swings too hard, which means it is just going to come back quicker the other way.
Mhm.
And, you can fast forward 2, 3, or 4 swings later, and we have Second Vatican Council. What have you heard growing up in this area about Second Vatican Council?
First and foremost, I would like to fact check you, and I'd like to confirm that you are correct. Is the Benedictine order in Burgundy, France?
I'm so glad I don't have to give my international relations degree back.
Yes, so you are correct there. Moving on to your question, what did I learn about Vatican II growing up in this area? In this area, Vatican II is bad. Vatican II, very, very bad, trying to change the church, trying to become more secular, trying to become more Protestant-like. At least that's what I have been told, which my advanced studies diving deeper into Vatican II, not quite the case, but that's kind of the overarching vibe, if you will.
There's definitely a small minority that says that. So Father Tomáš Halík, going back to him, he said that Second Vatican Council was an attempt to fix like an overcorrection where the pendulum had swung too hard. And it wasn't just about making peace with the modern world. It was an effort to shift from rigid Catholicism, which he describes as like an ideology, back to Catholicity. So Catholic in itself means universal, but Catholicity refers to how there are so many different flavors of Catholicism, so many different charisms, meaning gifts, meaning responsibilities that we all have, that we're not just a copy and paste of one another, but that we have dignity created by God. And the church has to kind of allow the onion to be unpeeled so that we can, and not impose too much on either the clergy or the people to the extent that it makes them all look exactly the same. And so that was the attempt of the Second Vatican Council. The pendulum has already swung back a little bit quicker, particularly in parts of the United States. Part of it is just because the rapid change of modernization and social ideas about the world are changing faster than they did in the past. And so Father Tomáš Halík says that this change within the church, Vatican II, came a little bit too late. However, it was still very important. I remember, just to put this out there, because I am totally happy to be called out for this later, my first meeting with a missionary at Catholic Campus Ministry, I made it known how much I hated but accepted and respected the authority of Vatican II.
Oh my.
And here we are.
Yeah.
A married man.
Look at you.
Married to another man.
Shocking.
It's actually, maybe you're not surprised, but I can't tell you how many other people I have met who are exactly the same as me. And so, you know what? I have a lot of patience and respect for folks who are struggling with something internally. It's not always sexuality, but for those who may be struggling with something internally and they're trying to rigidly put a lid on it because that is the only way to keep the crazy from taking over your life. So sometimes when the pendulum swings, it's actually an internal response more than the church as a whole. Today, we're talking about how the church has itself as structures and as pastoral methods change to respond to the current needs in the world. So Father Tomáš Halík, by the way, that's Tomáš Halík. I highly recommend him. He is a well-respected priest from the Czech Republic, and let me tell you, he is the real deal. So he's currently, I believe he's 77 years old. He was an underground priest during the time of communism. So you talked about who was the priest in the concentration camps?
Maximilian Kolbe.
Okay, so this is only a couple of decades after that. By the way, really cool that we have saints that are kind of in living memory at this point. So Father Tomáš, he was an underground priest. He was only 20 years old when his country was invaded further by the Soviets, who were trying to crush a movement of free speech and economic liberalization in his country. So imagine coming of age at a time when people are having hope of freedom, hope of being themselves, to say, wait, just a few more years and everything will be okay, things will get better. And then you are invaded by Russia.
Yeah.
Is history repeating itself?
It kind of feels like it.
Okay. Well, we're not going there, at least not yet. But Father Tomáš was a priest during this time. And 9 years later, when JP2, the Pope from Poland, visited his home country, the way that he attacked communism, which I really, really admire, but the way that he attacked it was very particular. It was a spiritual and a moral battle. It wasn't my soldiers are coming for your soldiers. It wasn't my economy is better than your economy. It was you guys are godless and we have ideas that allow you to flourish, that recognize human dignity, and you can't contain these ideas. And JP2 stared down communism.
Which is kind of cool. You know, when you take a look at, I mean, especially today, like in a very secular nation and a really secular world, I should say, some people may overlook the role of like religious leaders.
Yes.
But it's really, really cool to see a pope, and not just because it's JP2, but any pope kind of stand up for like what's right? Like you take a look at Pope Leo right now. You know, he's speaking out against what's going on in Israel, with Israel and Palestine, and then also Israel and some other countries in the Middle East. There's just a lot of uneasiness and unrest going on in the world right now. And when the Pope says something, it carries that weight because he's essentially speaking on behalf of over 1.3 billion Catholics. So there is a little punch behind his words. But like with JP2, he stared down communism, and really a lot of people link his willingness to stand up to communism to the downfall of communism.
100%. So the powers that the Pope in previous centuries would have wielded over others was, I am going to excommunicate you, and you as the king are now going to be pushed out of the church. It used to be, in some cases, I'm the Pope and I'm your governor. Respect me. In other ways, it would be controlling money. That is not the power of the church anymore. And so when we're talking about ecclesiology, we are trying to understand how the church theologically has changed to understand its role and the way that it responds to things around it. So now the gift of the church, it's not partisan. I actually want to make that point, because there were many times when I was younger, and you know I'm conservative, and you know that I pretty much always vote conservative. However, as a kid, there were definitely some times where the priest in the homily would say, I'm not going to tell you who you have to vote for, but
it's always the but.
If it wasn't the pro-life candidate, I will see you in confession. You're rolling your eyes.
So obviously the church has a very strong pro-life stance, which is completely fine.
No, I work for national right to life.
I know, but like my thing is like when it comes to this country and the church and politics,
yes,
like I understand everyone's going to immediately point to obviously separation of church and state, right?
Sure.
And that's the state not telling the churches what they can and can't do. I still don't like it the other way around. It makes my stomach uneasy, even if I agree with the message. When I hear a religious leader in the community say, if you vote a certain way, X, Y, and Z is going to happen to you. It just doesn't feel right. Like at the end of the day, I think you should vote your conscience. And if you're a person of faith, obviously you're going to take that into account. It just makes me feel a little queasy in my stomach.
It harkens back to the old ways of Catholicism in the Middle Ages, where the church controlled everything about the government and the people. And it almost seems like there is this futile attempt to say, hey, these are the ideas of the church, and You can't escape them, or we will punish you. And that was the attitude of the church in the past. And quite frankly, that worked very well. And I'm sure it saved many, many souls pre-democracy. However, one thing that St. John Paul II recognized and wielded very well was the power of the Christian ideal, not the ideology, because that would be saying that he's imposing, like it's my way or the highway. But he really actually believed in Catholicism to the point that he was willing to bet that if he had just gotten the message of Christianity out there, the people would say, no, thank you, hammer and sickle. I'm going to set that down and I'm going to go find Jesus Christ. And by the way, Poland has had a boom of vocation since then.
Mhm.
So JP2 was bold, but he wasn't bold in the way of trying to control people the way that the church had in the past. He was bold in the sense that he believed. And he believed that that had the power to set down the ideologies that came from man. And instead, we could empower people with the truth of human dignity. And it really, really deeply impressed me. And so going back to Father Tomáš Halík, when Poland's government fell when he was 39 years old, it only took a matter of months before the people of Czechoslovakia also experienced that freedom. Empires that attempt to restrict or control always eventually lose resolve, or the people will find a way to break free. I mean, that's why we have a democracy. I mean, we just not too long ago celebrated the 4th of July. That's what that was. It was the idea of freedom prevailing over a king that was across the world.
Oh, I thought it was because we didn't want to be taxed on tea. So we threw it overboard.
Okay, thank you for understanding the deeper meaning of being American.
Sorry.
But for Father Tomáš, he believes that the future of Catholicism is rooted in what's called a kenotic, that's Kenotic, kenotic spirituality. And that is an emptying out. So he cites the kenotic, it comes from Philippians 2, verse 6 through 7. I'll just read that. And we hear this, by the way, every single time we're at the Good Friday service, because there's no Mass on Good Friday. Mm-hmm. But he, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. So the church has, according to this theologian, outgrown many of the models that we tried before. When we outgrew the caves of the catacombs and started burying our people above ground, perhaps in mausoleums like the one that you desire, when we then started building massive temples and basilicas, we took on the form of the Roman. The Roman Empire fell, and then it really just kind of became the Catholic Empire. Mm-hmm. That's really what it was. But we outgrew that as well. And the way to get through that is to show the truth of the church. But really it's rooted in something in particular. It's not rules, it's human dignity. So think back to RCIA, and feel free to punt this back to me, because I asked your RCIA questions, and yes, we do know that it is now called OCIA. We're just calling John old. That's what we're doing.
It hurts.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Well, you're not going to convert again.
Deconverting's an option.
Oh,
I'm joking.
That's not this ministry. No. But going back to your experiences in RCIA, I mean, were there ever times where you sensed that maybe they were teaching you something difficult, and in lieu of a serious theological reasoning, they told you a rule or a discipline that you had to follow?
Oh my gosh, all the time. Yeah, so in RCIA, there wasn't a lot of like gray area. It was either black or white, especially when it came to those hot button issues, right? So RCIA in college, our alma mater is not exactly a conservative hotbed. So,
it isn't?
No, it's not, believe it or not. You didn't know that?
No, I got to admit, I mean, look, I grew up in the DC area, and I felt like our alma mater was significantly to the right of the people that I grew up with on my street.
Really?
I always felt like an oddball growing up on my street. Like, oh, there's that crazy conservative kid. you know me, the one who also volunteers with the homeless and immigrants, and they're like, there's that crazy conservative. And then I went to college and I felt more normal.
Well, I think in college people were less worried about what other people were really doing, in all honesty.
I was super worried.
But like going into RCIA, especially with my class, like we started with like 25 people in RCIA.
Sure.
A lot of us, you know, you're coming into college, you're kind of trying to figure out what you actually believe in. You're trying to figure out a lot of what you stand for, your own morals and values and everything. And then here you are being interested in converting to a religion that has a very set of rules and beliefs and teachings, and that, you know, when we go to ask questions about it, especially if it's a hot topic issue, there's only one answer. It's not, and there's no room for interpretation. It is yes or no. It is black or it's white. It's never gray. It's never maybe. It was always a solid answer. And if they couldn't give us an answer on something, it was either read the catechism or pray about it. And I'm not going to call them cop-out answers, but I feel like not being able to answer some of those more challenging questions doesn't exactly help in the long term.
No, and I don't know your specific situation here. I do know that in my parish, the catechists are volunteers. And so it's not always fair to expect them to have every answer to every situation because we're all unique, which is why I stress looking for those core eternal truths, trying to instill a sense of spirituality. And quite frankly, I believe that the way to do that, the more complicated that the world gets, the less black and white that the world gets, the way to do that is to be present and to accompany somebody in whatever pain it is that they're experiencing without judgment. This is not the world where the church ran the courts. By the way, there's a particular story of a saint that I revere who is a patron of a particular diocese in Virginia. And
I just had to think in my head real quick. I was like, oh, that's right.
For legal purposes. No, just kidding. This is a really revered saint. I'm not trying to draw attention to his flaws. I wish that we were more honest about the flaws of our saints because it would make the rest of us feel like sainthood is attainable. But this particular saint, there are stories in the history book where a grieving father who had just lost his infant son did not want to pay the church tax of donating the child's baptismal gown to the priest. So imagine that. You're a father, your child just died, and the priest says, I just did the funeral, now hand over the garment. Right? It's a little bit tough. However, that was society at the time. The father, I don't know what was on his heart. I'm sure it was anger. I'm sure it was grief. Maybe he was also rebellious. But that rebellion is what this particular saint tried to quell. And ultimately, indirectly, I guess I should say, this man was thrown in the cathedral jail.
Oh my.
We don't have jails in our cathedral anymore. You know why? Because we're a church and not a government. But that only hastened the rise of Protestantism in England during this time. So anyway, our saints, we have to look for the lessons that they offer us. And sometimes those lessons are what not to do. Most of the time, it's what to do. This is how you follow Christ. But none of us are perfect. And JP2 is really good about moving the church beyond these structures. So Vatican II tried to loosen the structures a little bit. And JP2 said, the way to do this in the spirit is to understand the principle of human dignity. Now that we have really captured that, because I do feel like if you go to church around here, you understand the importance of not throwing away someone who's disabled, not throwing away someone who is poor. The trick is not to simply say, hey, you have human dignity, good luck out there. It's to understand that people who are downtrodden, people who are not fully compliant with the church rules, that means people who are gay, people who are divorced and remarried, people who have committed heinous crimes. The important trick to learn is that they are created in the likeness of God too. We've talked about that in previous episodes, being made in the image and likeness of God. The likeness is a value statement. And there is something about you, John, that only you can teach the church about God. Something small, and maybe really small, about your personality, about your experiences, but God has given you something unique that I don't have. And this unique thing reflects back the Creator. And so even for those who are not compliant with church rules, we have to understand that to be fully committed to those principles, those spiritual truths of human dignity, we have to understand that if it's a homeless person, you're not just homeless and good luck. It's you're homeless, and there's something about you that is going to teach me about the Creator that I am not able to learn for myself. And once we grasp that, it means that a lot of things in the church have to change. Not theologically, but it does mean that we are called to go out of the pews and into the world, which no longer believes that we are credible because of abuse or because of wealth and things we've ignored in society. But we are called to go out there. And if we really want to understand the Christ that we receive in the Eucharist, we need to go be with those who have been thrown away. I mean, that's really the crux of this ministry here. But that's what Father Tomáš Halík means when he says we have to be a church that is kenotic or empty. You knew that, of course, from your time with who?
The Franciscans. Conventual flavored.
Okay. But tell me a little bit more about what that looked like in practical terms for the Franciscans. So when you were in formation, you were in a beautiful church, right? The friar you were staying at, wasn't it?
The friar in Chicago, beautiful, maybe not the term I would use.
Okay.
No, it was a very large, I believe it was one basement, first, second, third, fourth. It was like 6 or 7 stories.
Yeah.
This apartment building, and it was a nice little chapel that we had in the friary. But we would go to the parishes in Chicago that the order had control of from the archdiocese, and those are some really beautiful churches. The cathedral in Chicago is absolutely beautiful. So yeah, there's a lot of really, really cool, beautiful churches out there that we got to visit.
Did you guys care about making sure you had the most beautiful church?
No, in fact, the archdiocese gave the order 2 of the most rundown parishes in the entire city because, well, one, like no one was like the attendance was down. Obviously, the churches themselves needed a little TLC, and also the order was looking to take on more parishes, not just for their mission, but also for outreach too.
That's fair. Here's where I have a little bit of balance on this issue for once. I think beauty does matter. Beauty definitely helps us to go deeper into the spirituality. It helps remind us of the mysteries, to not assume that everything that the church contains spiritually are things that we can obtain for ourselves by ourselves. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of really important mysteries that are conveyed through art. And I'm very lucky to be at a parish that's beautiful and one that has many mosaics that we can, just walk the Stations of the Cross and you really feel inspired by it. So I do think that this is important. What I do not like is when we focus too much on that as the end. Like what's the reason? Like why are we focusing so much on okay, let's just call it out here. Christendom College in Northern Virginia. They just built a beautiful, beautiful Christ the King chapel. And it definitely mimics medieval. I don't know how they would describe it, but if you look at it, you might think that you are in 12th century England. And it's really, really inspiring. However, on their website, have you ever seen TikToks or videos of like those giant swinging incense boats?
Yes.
Bota Fumero. I don't know.
I'm assuming that was Italian.
It might be. I don't know. But I believe they have the largest one in the world. And here we go. It's right on their website. The Bota Fumiero, a large silver-plated brass thurible is what you swing the incense in, is a celebrated feature of the college's Christ the King chapel. It is inspired by their Spanish roots. Okay, click here to read more. But there are 3 videos of this incense boat on the college's website. And I am fascinated by it because, again, Christ the King, I love that. That's actually where my dad grew up in Atlanta, at Christ the King. It was where he went to school. We celebrate the Feast of Christ the King. But there's a certain obsession about recapturing what the church had during Christendom. And there's a certain obsession with trying to replicate it as if they have replicated anything beyond that tiny bit of architecture of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, and as someone who really does enjoy the architecture of a church, I'm definitely one of the weird people that, like, I'll go to a sporting event, and one of the first things I always want to do when it's a new team that I go see is I want to walk the stadium and see all the unique features of that sports stadium. It's the same thing with the church. You know, I spent 2 weeks in Europe this summer, and one of the things I did was every single town and city I went to, I found the parish or the cathedral to go in and kind of just experience a little piece of the church history and the history of that country and city and town I was in through their architecture. You can really learn a lot about that time period through religion, through faith, and through architecture. So yeah, I'm the same way. I think architecture is beautiful, but when you try to replicate it, you really can't replicate it, right? Like the cathedral in Bamberg took decades to complete. I was reading.
Well, this must have taken months.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing, right? Is now we have the technology and the science behind creating different materials that we can build these churches out of. We can erect a massive church in 2 years versus, hundreds and thousands of people working on a church, carrying stone by stone, placing it just right on the towers or on the entryways into the churches, and like making sure the foundation is set properly. It's not done the same way. So like when you see it now, it looks, what's the phrase I want to say? Those pre-built homes you see on the back of the 18-wheelers?
Yes.
It's like that, right? And then you see it on the outside, you're like, okay, cool. It has that old school feel. And then you walk in and it's 2025 on the inside. And you're just like,
sure.
And you're like, wow, that, like, the immersion's gone. Like you lost me at the front door kind of thing. Like if that was the vibe you're going for.
So this particular church on the college campus is beautiful. By no means do I want them to have a church that is ugly or plain. It is a really beautiful church. I am expressing an opinion here. This is not to say this is what the college is trying to convey, but there is such a focus on that historic kingship that is so material, so European. I mean, some of the most striking churches in the world, Christian churches in the world, Ethiopia, India, Mexico. I have absolutely no sense why there might be a particular obsession or care for replicating a particular time period in Europe, because we are not replicating a time period in Europe. If we were, among the things that would be bringing people to the pews would be, can you name some for me? What if you are a peasant or an everyday not British because it's too early, English citizen in 12th century England? Yes, of course it is your civic duty to go to church, and you're going to be in trouble if you don't go. But spiritually speaking, what is it that might bring you to the church doors?
I mean, the fear of not being devout enough that I might catch a disease.
Yes.
Or
plague.
Or something would happen to my family, or like my spirituality, my devotion would be called into question and I get shunned from my community kind of thing.
What has happened 5 times over this past week in the evening? weather-wise.
Oh, thunderstorms. Oh yeah, bad weather. Yeah,
bad weather. If you're struck by, I mean, the only plausible explanation for thunder and lightning back then was
God.
Exactly.
Like you didn't go to church, therefore
he was angry.
He was angry.
Yep. And apparently we are very godless in this region because we have had hundreds, if not thousands, of lightning strikes. No, it's not to make fun of the Catholics of earlier centuries. There was a great devotion. There was a great presence and appreciation of the liturgy, but prayer permeating into all aspects of everyday life. And in many ways, I wish that we could recapture that. But we are never going to be able to recapture it in the particular way that they lived out in the 12th century. And that's because we wash hands now. And because we have medicine for a headache, we have epidurals for pregnancies, we go indoors when it's lightning out. I'm sure they did back then too. But
we have air conditioning.
It's yes. And we sure do complain if it is not working.
And you know what? That is a valid point. We do.
But the main point is that even if we're replicating something of the 12th century, we are only doing so in a superficial way. And there are still many benefits to having this beautiful architecture because it draws people into that deeper mystery. But it's not the ends. The way that we recapture that same fervor for spirituality in the modern world, where the church is not a government, where the cathedral does not have a jail, the way that we recapture that is to go out and to accompany people who are in difficult situations, people who are experiencing things that we may not understand for ourselves. I'm not just thinking about LGBT individuals here. On the website, on the reflections page, we actually have an article dedicated to those who are facing end-of-life decisions. And yes, it's very pro-life. Before you click on it, it is. But it talks a lot about accompanying people in their last moments, not because they need it, and for some legal reasons we need them to hang on because it's a political liability if somebody has assisted suicide. No, that has literally nothing to do with the theology. The theology is that they are made in the likeness of God, and they draw us into the mystery of the sacraments that we receive at Mass and in confession by their presence. We learn something from them. And so the way to kind of recapture the fervor is to understand that you and I, but also every person we encounter in the street, is made by Christ, is made by the same eternal God who desires to see them in heaven equally as God desires to see you. And as much as Mary is my mother, Mary is your mother. And so I should treat you the same way that I should treat Mary's child. That is the frame that we have to have in the modern world because those political structures are not coming back. It's just not the way the world was made. And also, as a universal church, there are a number of places in the world that are dedicated. They have dedicated Christian populations, even some who are underground, like in China. And they have never known or experienced any inkling of a church that was governing them because the European Catholicism has no relevance in the spirituality that they are trying to live out in China or in India. So we quoted heavily from Father Tomáš Halík today. That's Halik. One of my favorite books by him is called The Afternoon of Christianity, The Courage to Change. I highly recommend it. Go look it up, go buy it, because just as in previous episodes, we've talked about what to do when you're experiencing something that makes you feel unwanted in the church. The same way I encourage you to tell your stories, it's because your stories help make the church more holy. And, I expressed some, what for me, they're hot takes on this episode, particularly about the chapel at Christendom College. I appreciate what they are doing in the sense that the beauty does draw me, and hopefully it draws others into the deeper meaning of the Eucharist. But we can't stop there. The Eucharist is the fuel. we put the fuel in the car. Where are we going? So that's what we got today. John, you got any closing thoughts for us?
No, I think it was a very good episode. I think there's a lot to think about. I think there's a lot that people can take forward from this episode. And I know I'm looking forward. I know you're looking forward to see the responses we get from our community, that our ever growing community that is being built here for this podcast and for the ministry. So yeah, I'm really excited to see everyone's response to some pretty good thoughts to have going forward with this episode.
John, I can't wait to show you the relics at my home parish.
I've been to your home parish before.
Oh, okay. Well, have you seen the relics?
I don't think I was cool enough to see them then. I think you were kind of like hoarding them to yourself.
We only put them on display during COVID, so that's an opportunity for me to invite you back. But in the meantime, as we always close out the show, I'm so grateful for the listeners because your stories are really deeply inspiring. I hope there's something, even if it's just a couple sentences from this episode, that will help you get through your week, will help you unpack whatever it is that you're trying to work through. And just know that John and I were praying for you. We are so delighted that even if you've already left Catholicism, that you are still thinking about some of these issues. And just know that you reflect something back about the Creator, that the church is not complete until we have had a chance to meet you. And we delight in that. So thank you again for joining us on this episode. Look forward to chatting with you sometime soon.